Okay, we will call the April 9th workshop to order. Please note that all council members are present, and Councilman Flores is going to lead us in the flag salute this evening, so please stand.
Place your right hand over your heart. Ready? Begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is public comment. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address an item that is not on the agenda elsewhere? Okay, seeing none, we will move on. Getting things out of order here. Okay, item number 1 for discussion. City of Chino commissions. This is to discuss and provide direction to staff regarding the city's sphere of influence, planning commission participation, and broadcasting commission meetings. I'd like to ask for a report from our city manager, Linda Reich, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the council. If you'll recall, on October 10th, the council held a workshop to discuss certain items as it pertained to our commissions. At that meeting, the council asked us to come back with a plan to include sphere of influence commissioners to the planning commission, 1 or 2. So Warren is going to give us an update on that. And the second question is, should we start broadcasting our commissions, both the C, Community Services, Parks and Rep, and the Planning Commission? So tonight, we're going to get 2 reports for you, and then after that, we'd like to hear your discussion and thoughts on both items.
Okay,
Thank you, Mayor.
thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. So you may recall that back on July 5th, 2023, you directed the Community Services and Parks Recreation Commission and Planning Commission to discuss and provide input on the commission appointment process and terms. In August, let me go to the slide here. Can you punch the slide down? One more. In August 2023, the Planning Commission met, and so did the Community Service Park and Recreation Commission met in their respective meetings to discuss and provide feedback to the City Council. Both the Planning Commission and Community Service Park and Recreation Commissioners were asked for feedback on the following 4 questions. Should there be at least 1 commissioner appointed for each City Council district? Planning Commission voted 5-1 against, and I should point out that there was 1 commissioner absent at the meeting. That's why there's only 6 total. And then the Community Services, Parks and Recreation Commission voted 5-2 against. Second question, should term limits be established for commissioners? The Planning Commission voted 4-2 against, and the Community Services, Park and Recreation Commission voted 5-2 against. Next question, should there be a commissioner appointed for the city's sphere of influence in an advisory capacity? The Planning Commission voted 4-2 in favor, and the Community Service, Park and Recreation Commission voted 4-3 in favor. And then lastly, should there be a commissioner appointed from the city's sphere of influence in a voting capacity? The Planning Commission voted 6-0 against, and the Community Service, Park and Recreation Commission voted 6-1 against. Next slide. There we go. So then on October 10th, 2023, the City Council discussed the feedback received from the commissioners. The City Council voted at that time 5-0 to convert the Community Services, Park and Recreation at-large appointment to an appointment by the mayor and City Council approval of that appointment. The council also directed staff to return with a proposal for adding 1 or more members to the Planning Commission from the sphere, and then the City Council directed staff to provide a cost analysis of broadcasting commission meetings. So the first part of the presentation, as Linda mentioned, is going to be discussed about the appointment of a sphere representative to the commission, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ari, and she's going to go over the next portion, which is the broadcasting of the commission. Next slide. So staff in the City Attorney's Office discussed the SOI commission appointments and have recommendations in the following 5 areas: sphere of influence members, participation on matters within the SOI, the sphere of influence, executive official officio members, participation on the design review board, and conflict rules that apply. Okay, in terms of the sphere of influence members, we are recommending to expand the planning commission to add 2 members from the city's sphere of influence, 1 from each sphere. As you know, we have 2, and I'll show you a graphic at the end of the presentation for you to look at. And then each member will also serve as an alternate to the other member in case one can't come to a meeting. That's what we're planning on doing. And then for participation on matters within the sphere of influence, we are recommending the sphere of influence members participate on issues that impact their respective sphere of influence areas, issues impacting property in close proximity. Usually it's 300 feet around a project area, so we thought that was appropriate of the area that they represent. And then finally, for citywide members, we think it's appropriate for both of them, the representatives, to provide input. And that's such as general plan amendments, zoning, code matters, and that sort of thing up in that area. We're also recommending that the sphere of influence members be ex officio members with full rights to participate at the meetings, but will have, they won't have a right to vote on an issue. To make sure the sphere of influence members can provide the necessary input that the city council envisioned, we are recommending that the members attend the design review board meeting and provide feedback. And then that feedback will be presented to the planning commission. What we're thinking is not only will they provide the feedback and we present it to the planning commission in a verbal report, but we'll also put it in the staff reports. So that feedback will be presented to the planning commission in that fashion. And then lastly, it is important to note that all state and city rules pertaining to conflicts of interest would apply to these members. The second portion, Fred, do you want to give a little input on that?
Certainly. So interestingly enough, the Brown Act doesn't speak to non-voting members at all, whether or not they're considered part of the quorum and the rules related to their participation in discussions offline with a majority of the members. But I think the prudent approach would be to have them be subject to the Brown Act so that their discussions outside of a public meeting would limit their ability to speak to a quorum of the Planning Commission. I think that would be it would keep in line with the rest of your rules. So that's the suggestion there.
Okay, and I just wanted to show you this slide for you to remember, and then the audience, of our 2 areas. The one when I say north is the bigger one on the north side of the screen, and we call the one below that the south sphere, and those are the 2 areas that we're talking about. And that concludes my presentation. Fred and I are here to help answer any questions regarding our recommendation, and it is a recommendation, so we're open to suggestions and comments in a different direction. And that concludes our presentation.
Can you put the slide back up on your recommendations, please?
Let's see here.
I think it was just one or 2.
Oh, it's that one. I kept going this way. Okay, we got it.
Okay. So I'd like to ask for council input on what is your desire or thoughts on accepting sphere of influence members. Now, I'm only thinking about Planning Commission, not Community Services Commission, because anyone outside of the city can participate on events. The fee is different, but they can participate. Okay, excellent. Chris, you want to start?
Can we come back to me, Mayor?
Okay.
Thank you.
Mark?
I'm in favor of adding the 2 members from the sphere of influence to the Planning Commission and allowing them to participate on matters within the sphere of influence or 300 feet within that area. I'm not in favor of allowing them to obviously vote on matters that just pertain to the city, but I'm okay with them being and participating in making input on matters that concern the sphere of influence. But my only question would be, is as we annex islands, if the individual then becomes a member of the city, do they then automatically come off and then we look for somebody else within the sphere because then they become members of the city? So that would be my only question.
I would think so.
And certainly those details could be specified, but generally they would continue to serve until either removed or a new appointment is made to, presumably if an entire sphere goes away and gets annexed, then you could have 2 members from the other area that
Well, so I'd like, for example, North End, we're going to be annexing, looks like pieces at a time. So if one particular member is like in an island, and then all of a sudden that island gets annexed, but the rest of the sphere is still not part of the city yet, do we move that one member off because now he's part of the city, and then we look for somebody that's within the sphere?
And so that goes to the point I made. You could specify that. So for example, you could keep newly annexed area members as continuing to participate as the sphere of influence member. So let's say within a few years after annexation, and thereafter, you know, you wouldn't have that position anymore.
Now, a normal
That-
term is 2 or 4 years? 4 years.
Or four. I'm sorry.
Maybe a kind of a compromise. I think maybe 2 years on sphere of influence representatives would be good, to make sure that we get a variety of opinions on things. And if an area is annexed that has that member in it, they finish their term, rotate off, and we select someone who is not currently then in the city.
I'm good with that.
Does that sound okay? Karen, input?
Can I clarify for Councilmember Lucio? Did you say you are not interested in them voting on things citywide?
Correct.
Okay. Or within the sphere?
Only within the sphere.
So you would want the member to have a voting right within the sphere, because the recommendation is that they're ex officio and they wouldn't vote, they'd just be advisory capacity.
Well, I would be okay with them voting in that instance, but if the majority just wants them to be I'm okay with that too.
Here's just one reason for considering an ex officio position, that we always deal with a quorum issue when you're dealing with a Brown Act body. So if they are a full voting member, then the quorum of their body would be 9 members. So you either invite them to every meeting or you don't have them at certain meetings, but the quorum of the body would still be 9 members. So that's why having them as ex officio, you actually don't technically count them as part of the quorum. It just creates a little bit of, it's a challenge, but not a,
Well, a quorum would
not
be
an
5.
impossible
then,
hurdle.
right?
Pardon?
Quorum would be 5 instead of 4,
Correct.
if you included them in voting members. Want to hear more?
I mean, my only thing would be, let's say, for example, if we go to vote on something and the planning commission is kind of split, but the members in the sphere don't agree with what's going on, they really have no say, so it still goes by only the body of, where they really have no voice. And that's would be my only thing, is if we added it to 9, only when it encompasses something within the sphere, then their voice would be heard. Otherwise, they're just kind of just another member of the community that comes up and speaks.
Fair point.
Okay, Karen?
I'm in favor of having sphere of influence members because there's so much sphere to be annexed, and a lot of residents up there, I think, that would like to participate and have input to that. I'd like to hear what they have to say. I'm in favor of them having participation on matters within the sphere. I'm also in favor of them having participation on design review. I have a different perspective. If they are in the sphere and they're representing us, and then they get annexed in, I agree with the mayor, maybe we go with a two-year compromise on that. But now they're in the city, so I think they should have voting powers on, once they're annexed into the city, voting powers to the commission, because now they can opine on, now that they're in the city, they're, one of the members of our planning commission. And we cross that bridge when we have to re-up a commissioner, through the selection process, who would be best suited to serve on that position moving forward. So I think that that person automatically is going to adopt voting powers once they get annexed into the city, and I don't think we should take them off just because they get annexed. I think they should ride out their term, be able to vote, and we evaluate with each member from there moving forward.
Okay, Curtis?
Could I ask a quick follow-up question? So let's take that scenario. The city annexes the area where the sphere of influence member is located.
Right?
You now only have one sphere of influence member, right, under the scenario you posed, and that member becomes a full voting planning commission member, right?
Kind of changes.
So would you add, or would you just hold off until that term expires and then?
I think we hold off till the term is up. But I think there's
Okay.
the potential that we have another commissioner, right, that represents that area up there that's being annexed. So they're going to be annexed into another commissioner's area. So I think that's up to the council to sit down and tell those two members now, hey, we selected the sphere person. What if the sphere person's doing a better job than the current commissioner that's serving that area? So we sit down and say, hey, we're going to look at both your applications, right, and see who's best suited to serve moving forward. And it would just be, I don't think it'd be right to just tell a person, well, now that you're annexed in, now you're off. I think there has to be an understanding with that person gets annexed in, that we're going to have to sit down and vet the right person to serve in that area from that point forward. And then we would select a new sphere of influence person for another location.
Let me interject something.
But are you adding
Problem
what?
with that is we do not hire or select commissioners by districts. We try to make it even, but they're not specifically voted from a district. So the person being annexed in, Karen, would not necessarily replace or double up an area, because remember, we're trying to get the best qualified people, not a person in each district.
I think you're right, Mayor. I think we've had this, I think that's what brought this workshop forward. I think that's probably part of the later conversation. Do we have people by district? I think we've already talked about not wanting solely to make it that way, but we don't want to eliminate somebody by district, but that I mean, no matter how we stack it, districting has changed our makeup. I like a lot of things that we're trying to do to balance it, but that's something we have to consider moving forward.
The only thing I foresee that could be a problem is if, let's say, for example, that one person gets annexed into the city and then now he has full voting rights, then we're technically making the full voting power, instead of 7, now it's 8. And then you can have a split of a 4-4 now, and then things get locked up, where we lose that, always being odd, where somehow or another the vote has to, there has to be a decision made with a majority. Where we do that, then we're basically gonna leave it up to potentially a split where nothing moves forward on a potential controversial project because you have a 4-4.
And I think that's exactly what we were thinking through, council member, is the way it's structured is, hey, if there's a project in your sphere area, you get input, whichever one. What we're talking through right now is if they're voting, how does that work? Because if it's impacting one sphere, does both of them still vote, or is it one? Now, even if they're not in the city, if we allow them to vote as a sphere of influence member, and it's in one area, now you have the 7 commissioners, and it's impacting the one sphere, so you're adding one vote to it. The thought when Fred and I were going through it was, even if they were allowed to vote, it wouldn't be both areas that would be voting. It would be only the one that, in the area that's getting impacted. The only thought that we would change it is if we're doing land use changes that affect the sphere itself completely, then both would be part of that. So as you continue your discussion, just keep that in mind. That's why we were thinking, oh, if only one was voting because that was the impact, then that would cause that same issue. Now we have 8. And
I
if
think this is getting it too complicated.
it is.
In all honesty.
And
I think it'd be hard to ask almost anybody to put in this type of work and read this type of paperwork without having some skin in the game. And you're gonna read all this paperwork, go through all this material, go to the training, and then just be like, "Oh, so here's my opinion," and then the rest of the commissioners sit there and say, well, it doesn't matter because that person can't vote.
And I think the recommendation too is that they wouldn't be participating in all the other ones that are within the city, just the ones that relate to the sphere. So they wouldn't have to read every council report and participate in every meeting. So if we're doing something in the North Sphere, then they're brought in, DRB, everything. They read the information, they have input, it goes in the report, it's reported. Now, would they have the ability to be at the meeting and speak as well?
So
Yes.
maybe the compromise on that is that the person who is now annexed into the city still sits on the sphere advisory, right? They're still the advisory.
They still represent
yeah?
the sphere.
And they get to vote on the issues with the sphere, but not the other things until their term runs, and then we decide who's going to be the commissioner.
And then if they want to apply to be a commissioner for the next opening with the regular voting body, then they have that option.
I mean, they have to have some skin in the game in voting to the sphere, or what's the point? But I also think that, I see the problem that has been.
And I think,
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think the difference here for us when we were reviewing it is that we're actually presenting to the commission that we went to this DRB process, and this member had input, and this member's input is actually in the staff report. Because as you know, when we, at the planning commission level, when we take a project to DRB, we always put their recommendation, their changes, everything in that report. We plan on pulling this person in and putting it in the report. While they don't vote, it's more than just a regular resident walking up. And again, like Linda said, they can walk up to the dais and we can say, you know, the SOI member is here to talk on the issue this evening regarding this project. So it's a little more, it may not be satisfy the council, but that's why we came to this decision, because it is more than the usual resident.
Are they still invited to the other meetings, to attend the other meetings as a member of the planning commission? Or are they only invited when there's an issue involving the sphere?
We planned on only bringing them to the DRB process and the input as far as the sphere issue. They're more than welcome to come to any, but we weren't planning on putting their input into a project because it doesn't affect the area they live in.
Unless, I'm sorry, Warren, unless it's a general plan zoning that impacts the entire city, then we would want their input, because at some point that will impact the sphere. But if we do annex in, and now that person's a voting member, then if we replace the other one, it's awkward. I kind of understand what you're saying. Let's let them get annexed in, finish out their 2-year term. They can apply for the commission, and then at that point, we can replace the sphere, the northern sphere, the southern sphere.
Yeah.
And then you have that
need
person
someone
again.
from the sphere to be represented. I don't think you should boot them off just because they got annexed in, but I think that's why it should be a 2-year term. And then at the end of the 2-year term, then they get replaced by another person from the sphere.
Because even if they're annexed in, they're still representing that area.
Yeah.
Because that's why they got on the commission. Just because they're annexed in doesn't mean they don't have the same knowledge and information about that sphere.
Right.
And maybe to Councilmember Lucio's point, to the extent they do get annexed in, they'd ride out the 2 years, but to avoid the split, you wouldn't just convert them to a voting member, would you? What would the council like to do there?
If we're going to have any voting from them at all, it should be on everything dealing with the sphere or nothing. I think trying to figure out a division would be way too complicated.
Even
So
after
they're-
they
yeah,
get
they're either gonna be a
annexed.
voting member or they're not gonna be a voting member. So
I
either
think-
ex officio or voting.
I think if they vote, Mayor, I would recommend as a staff member that it wouldn't apply to an individual sphere. To make the number 9, is they would vote on anything in the spheres
Right.
themselves, and that would make it 9. It wouldn't
That's
make
what
it
I'm
an 8.
saying.
Okay.
That's what I'm
I
saying.
misunderstood
Anything
you.
having to do with the sphere, if they're gonna be voting, they get to vote on anything in the sphere. You know, both of them that would vote, whether it be the north or the south, right, which would make it the 9. You wouldn't just pick one if we were dealing with just the north, because then you'd have that 8 figure. And if it's not the sphere, then their name isn't on the voting line. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Anything else, Karen? Curtis?
I am in favor of members of the sphere to come on to the planning commission and to participate in all these matters that come before them. I am not in favor of any voting power. I appreciate the information that they would provide on every issue that comes before the planning commission, whether it has to do with the sphere or not. You know, I mean, if you had 9 people talking about one item, I'd like to hear what they have to say about everything, not just the sphere. But in regards to the sphere and those issues that come up, I am not in favor of them being able to vote on those issues. Now, once, and also I'm in favor of the 2-year term, because if we do absorb that area, then they carry a lot of experience in the future. If they did want to come on to the commission as a voting member, they could certainly do that because they'd have the experience. But that's my take on it.
Okay, Chris?
Yeah, so I do like the 2-year, the 2-year term. I like that the 2 members would be, I like what Kurt said, that, they do have some sort of say in, in all the conversations, not just the sphere of influence. But I also do like the, for the 2 members to have voting rights when it comes to issues within the sphere of influence.
Yes on voting within the sphere?
Yes.
Okay, we definitely have decided, yes, we want to bring them on. We've definitely decided, yes, we want 2-year terms. What needs to be discussed more is the voting issue. Okay? So personally, I have no problems with them voting on things that deal with the sphere. But I don't think they should vote on things that are within the city and not the sphere, because they're not technically citizens of the city yet. They will be, but they aren't yet. So, if we have a split planning commission, say we have 5 in favor of something and 4 against something, that could sway a vote. But they're not technically citizens yet of the city of Chino. So yes, voting on the sphere, no on the rest of the city. I can understand, Linda, what you're saying about the general plan, because that overlay would affect the sphere. But if it doesn't affect the sphere, then I probably would say no on the voting. Now, what kind of items would come to them that would not affect the sphere?
Well, the recommendation was that they would only be participating in sphere, but if it was something that impacted the entire city, like the general plan update, like zoning changes, what was the other one? There were 3.
I think that,
That
Projects
we would-
within 300 feet.
Yeah.
of the
Projects
sphere.
within 300 feet, that they should have a discussion, be able to discuss that, because at some point, the general plan includes the sphere,
Yeah.
the zoning includes the sphere, so that would impact them. So that was one of the recommendations.
So if it happened to have been a building or a business that is currently in the city and there's some controversy on it that goes to the planning commission, they would not have input on that because it's not the sphere.
correct.
Unless it's within 300 feet.
Yeah, unless it's within 300 feet.
So in that scenario, presumably, if you are giving them voting rights,
They would
they
have the
presumably
right to have a
would
say.
have a say on a project within the jurisdiction of the city.
Okay. We have 2 members of the public here. Oh, Chris, go ahead.
I was just gonna ask a question. Can we say that? Can we say, hey, you can vote 300 feet and in, but you can't vote outside. Yeah, we can.
You can specify that. I have to say, I've never dealt with this, so it's very unusual, and the difficulty is the quorum rules, as I mentioned. You'd still count it as a 9-member body, but you would only invite them to those times when the sphere is actually impacted.
Well, but you could have a planning commission meeting where you're dealing with stuff that's just inside the city and stuff that's in the sphere. So you wouldn't not invite them to the entire meeting, and you wouldn't ask them to leave.
Right.
So they'd be there. They have a right to have a say. They just wouldn't vote on things that are not affecting the sphere.
So are you saying you'd want them invited to all of the planning commission meetings?
I would say so.
Yeah.
But they wouldn't have voting rights on anything that's not the sphere. Because we want them, okay, I can't say we. I would want them to know what's going on in the city because they potentially will become part of the city. So, if we're going to have an area that we're potentially going to annex in the future, we want them to willingly come into the community. We don't want them to feel like, they're an outsider, so to speak. So I would say they'd be able to come to any meeting, any planning commission meeting. They would be invited to attend. They wouldn't have to if they didn't want to, but when it came to voting, only items that affect the sphere of influence or the general city that also encompasses the sphere, like the general plan. Does that make sense? Am I saying that correctly? I wouldn't uninvite them. I wouldn't say, oh, you can come in here on item 5, you can't come in on 1 through 4. You can come in on 5, but you gotta hurry up and leave on 6 and 7. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So I have another question. So in those issues that are being voted on, like here in the city, since that's just, with this example, right, they won't have any voting rights there. But in terms of what Fred was talking about with the quorum, so on the report, would it look like, 2 absent and 7 voting? Like, how would that be reported on?
They abstain.
Oh,
They'd abstain, right? They'd abstain. Or how would
They
you
would
show
be
that?
recorded as absent if they don't show up, yes. So I was just noodling on the mayor's suggestion that they would be invited but wouldn't necessarily have to show up.
It'd be like the public giving input.
Yeah, I suppose for your attendance rules, the
Right.
council receives reports of your commission attendance. It would just provide a notation that this is something that didn't include the sphere. Yeah.
Well, you could also, like, Watermaster, a lot of those meetings that I attend, there's, members and then non-members, and there's a way that you could indicate whether they attend or not.
Right.
And then the voting would show whether they voted or not, and it would clearly state sphere of influence. You'd have to identify it in the subject matter. I guess, there would be kinks to work out, obviously, and after our discussion this evening, then I would hope that staff would go back and refine this even more and bring it back one more time. Anything else? Okay, we have 2 members of the public that I see. Do you guys want to say anything? No? Okay.
This is what I've heard, unless you want to have
No,
further
go ahead.
deliberations. So it would be, yes, on the 2 members, there would be a 2-year term rather than the 4-year. They would ride out their term if the city happens to annex their area, and then they're welcome to apply for full membership or membership to the,
Well, they could apply to an opening when the next opening comes up.
right.
Otherwise, when they roll off another sphere, we would advertise
Right.
again for somebody in that sphere to apply.
But you wouldn't add the additional sphere member until that term expires.
Right, they would expire and roll off. They wouldn't expire. They would,
Their term.
Roll
I
up.
mean, they're gonna go die. Their term would end, okay? At the end of their term, they would be off, but then they could apply to an opening that comes up.
Right, but my question is, now you only have 1 true sphere member.
But they're still representing.
they're
They're still
still-
representing their sphere.
So then the other point is the SOI members would participate in all planning commission meetings, but can only vote on items impacting the sphere of influence. I'm
No?
seeing 1 no. one definite no, maybe?
Okay, is there anyone that does not want them to vote on anything that has to do with the sphere? Karen?
No.
Mark?
I'm good with them voting.
Chris?
I'm good with them voting as well.
Okay, and you're
Me too.
against voting?
No.
You're okay on vote, okay, 4 yes, 1 no.
I-
So yes, they can vote.
I guess the only thing I would throw in there is that I know right now, I think it's our, maybe both, but I know our planning commission, we really don't have any representation up in the northern area. So in the scenario where we open up applications to members of the sphere of influence and we don't get applications, I mean, I
And it
think
stays vacant.
it stays vacant.
If nobody applies, it stays vacant.
So it's either we fill both of them or fill none.
No, you can fill, if we get one application from the south and we get none from the north, then we can take one from the south. If we get applications from the north and not the south, then we take one from the north. There needs to be one from both, but if we get no interest at all from the south or the north, then that one stays open. And then maybe once a year, we advertise to see if we can fill it.
That actually raises a really good question.
Yeah, well,
Because then we have the tie.
yeah, the tie again.
Oh, God, that's right.
Which is why my suggestion is they don't vote. So we don't have to worry about that issue.
Yeah, I understand, but they need to have skin in the game.
I understand your thought on that, but to avoid the problem,
I just think it would be unfair to have 2 members from the north or 2 members from the south, because their needs are different. You know what I mean? When you look at the south area and you look at Riverside Hill and McKinley and all down there, that's very different than the north area.
Why do we have to remove the person that's serving in the sphere when their term expires if we don't get an application? Why can't we just
Could be
reappoint them?
considered, could be considered if we don't get any applicants.
So here's just I think Councilmember
And again,
Flores'
they're a full
question.
voting member if they're in the city, which again gets that,
That's okay.
no, it gets that, it could be a split vote. Because it'd be 8 members instead of 7.
Well, we would still consider them a member of the sphere, not a full voting member.
I don't know. Any, go ahead, Fred.
So his question raised an issue in my mind. Would the SOI member be voting only on the issue within their particular sphere and general plan and issues, or could they vote on either
You just said both.
issue?
Yeah, both.
That's a
either
good question.
sphere
I would
issue.
say both, because there's a lot of large lots in both areas. And if we're deciding to maintain large acreage for animal keeping or whatever, I think we would need the input from both. You
So
know,
they could vote on any sphere issue, whether or not it's their sphere. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
If we didn't get an application, Mayor, we normally do the city council, and we could ask, for somebody to be appointed to it in consideration. Always look at a person and say, hey, we'll seek out somebody who wants to do it and appoint somebody.
Well, we could encourage people to apply. I think if it looks like we're not getting applicants, then I would encourage us to talk to people and get them to apply. I don't think I would want the council to separately recommend someone who did not apply. You know what I mean?
Another question. In terms of their pay, if they're only voting on maybe even one, maybe lucky twice, I'm thinking a year, are they getting paid what everybody else is getting paid?
That's a good question. I didn't even think about that.
I don't know. That's
I
for
would
discussion as
think
well.
that they would get paid equally.
Equally.
They're on the commission.
If you're inviting them all, that's what I thought
Yeah.
would be the assumption.
But, yeah, in the scenario, if somebody shows up to, only those meetings where, they can vote, let's just say it's one out of, the 12 or whatever a year, 24 a year. I mean, is that fair? I don't know.
I believe,
Go to a meeting if it
Yeah.
doesn't involve
I've
them.
involved them, yeah.
I believe commissioners only get paid if they show up for a meeting, correct? If they don't show up, they don't get the stipend.
Okay, there it is.
Sorry, correct. It's not based on how many items they do. So if they don't show, then they
Okay.
get excused, and then they don't get reimbursed for that day.
Understand.
You have to attend in order to
So,
get
okay, I
paid.
didn't know that. That's good.
Any other discussion? Okay, staff.
Can
come
we
back
just
with-
clarify, do you have it? Can we just clarify one more time to make sure we have it right?
Sure.
So then the thought was we would bring back an ordinance, but would you like us to come back, clarify it all one more time?
Yes.
And then we'll come back with the ordinance? Okay.
Yes.
Can you?
Do you want me to reread the points?
Yeah, just
Okay.
to make sure that we have it right.
Yep. So definitely include 2 SOI members, make them 2-year terms only. They would complete their term should the city annex their particular sphere of influence area
And continue to represent the sphere,
and continue to represent
right?
the sphere in the same voting capacity, so only limited to voting in the sphere. And the clarification was either sphere of influence board member or commissioner can vote on any sphere issue. It doesn't have to be their particular north or east area. The SOI member would participate in all meetings, but can only vote on items impacting their sphere, so they would be invited to attend.
Or general plan.
Or general, yeah, when I say sphere
Yeah.
issues, general plan, zoning, that really covers the whole city or anything within 300 feet or within the sphere.
And provide input.
Provide input, always
Yep.
provide input. And the voting would be on any items, north or south, they both have a vote. Okay. And then they get the equal pay for the meetings they come to, which is what? I don't even know, 125 now? Is this stipend?
Okay,
Okay.
look it up. Okay, next, Linda. Okay.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, City Council, staff, and guests. City staff has assessed the feasibility of expanding broadcasting to include City Commission meetings. Current challenges, notably understaffing and the need for strategic right-sizing, have prompted a comprehensive analysis. The demand for our video production services has more than doubled since 2020, reflecting our community's evolving communication needs in this increasingly digital age, where keeping up with the pace of online engagement is crucial for staying relevant and informative. Our team, initially configured with 1 full-time coordinator and 2 part-time associates at 19 hours each, has been adapting to these changes as duties have expanded to include remote meeting facilitations, coverage of workshops, ADA-compliant video captioning, filming and editing staff trainings, and a 3-fold increase in coverage of city and partner events and activities to be used in recap videos, website, newsletter, social media, and video production. To address these growing demands effectively, a strategic restructuring is being proposed for consideration as we review the budget later this year. This includes the introduction of a new full-time cable TV producer and a full-time cable associate, estimated to necessitate an additional budget allocation of $122,892. Their roles will be crucial in managing our current demand and responsibilities and ensuring the quality and consistency of our content. An essential part of this restructuring is focusing on recruiting and training. Attracting the right talent that is skilled, creative, and motivated is pivotal. Therefore, we're also reviewing and potentially adjusting the pay rates of our part-time cable TV associates to remain competitive and attractive to top candidates. The associates currently cap out at $19.65 an hour. With these considerations in mind, we recommend against expanding the broadcasting of additional meetings at this time. Our priority is to ensure our team is well-equipped and structured to meet our current demands before taking on new responsibilities. This strategic pause will allow us to build a more resilient and adaptable team, ensuring we not only meet but exceed our community's expectations in this digital era. Thank you for your time, and I'm open to any questions.
All right, the 2, are they associates now that we have?
Yes, we have 2 cable TV part-time associates.
So this would be hiring 1 brand-new full-time and leaving the 2 current ones at part-time?
Correct,
You
yeah.
wouldn't want to make them full-time?
Well, we're definitely exploring that just to meet the current demand. Yeah.
Okay, Chris, input?
I agree with with the recommendation, although I would love to televise, our commission meetings but, I was looking at our city council meetings and we don't even crack 100 views, and we haven't cracked that in a long time. So, I would agree with I just don't think it's the right time, so.
Okay. Mark?
My question is, any of our neighboring cities, do they broadcast their planning commission or community service meetings?
Yes, we did take a look at a few of our neighboring cities. We have Eastville, Ontario, that do. Montclair, Chino Hills, Pomona, Upland, and Rancho Cucamonga do not.
Okay. And right now, we're currently only getting about 100 views on our...
So we have stats on the live stream on YouTube as well as the Legistar. So on Legistar, we average about 25 views for our council meetings. And on YouTube, we average about 22, and that's council and workshops. If we're just talking about workshops, it's about 8.
Okay, and the main reason we were looking at this was just security purposes wise, right? Where if we broadcasted them, then the police department could see them, and if there was some issues, they could respond. Something along those lines I think was the initial reason why we brought it up.
I think it was a recommendation from a commissioner.
Yeah.
At our first discussion about commissions, one of our commissioners recommended that we broadcast.
Okay. I think
And- I'm sorry, can I add, we have added Sergeant at Arms, I think we call them, police officer at our commission meetings now, just for that reason.
Okay. I think for the amount of views that we currently get, I don't know if it's worth spending the money. That's my opinion.
Karen?
I know from personal experience that we need more help on Channel 3 in production from being a department director and how often those employees are used. And there is a skill set that comes along with the filming and the editing and producing that content. So I certainly also support the proposed solution and the restructuring. I also, I'm sort of along the lines with the mayor. I think, our other staff is probably worthy of that consideration as well. I happen to be, even though it doesn't seem like a lot of views, in favor of broadcasting to include the commission meetings, because I think it gives our public an opportunity. There's a lot of important things that are discussed in Planning Commission, a lot of important things that are discussed in Community Services Commission, a lot of information, and I think it gives people an opportunity to go back and look at it. And I think it's the way of the future and the live streaming. I think it's forward thinking and gives our public an opportunity to research those things and go back and look at it. And I think it's a good idea, but I'm also willing to do whatever the majority of the council recommends.
Okay, Kurt?
Like the Mayor Pro Tem, I absolutely agree that I think it would be a great thing to be able to broadcast these meetings to the public for those folks that can't get out and come out and see these live and in person, and something's going on with them. I think it's a great avenue that they have to be able to sit home and watch these on cable or actually on YouTube. But I'm with the staff on this one, just against the immediate expansion of this. I think that in the future, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, that we absolutely take a hard look at revisiting this. I think there's a lot of information to be gained still, and I, at this point in time, would go with the staff's recommendation and not broadcast these meetings.
Okay. I'm really surprised that the viewing audience has decreased that much, because we used to have, I think, a lot more people watch them. So I'm really surprised that the count is that low.
The cable TV providers don't provide stats on if people are watching via TV. So these are all stats from the live streaming.
Oh, not the actual. Oh.
YouTube, Legistar, yeah.
Okay.
And,
It's interesting, they don't.
and it's not just live, they also rerun them.
Yeah, they rerun it.
Numerous times.
Because I get a lot of input from people
I
that
do
watch
too.
it on TV.
Because I get
Interesting.
something up with the stats, because I get a lot of people like, oh, or I went and looked at it, or I researched it, I watched
Yeah,
it.
or they hear that something happened and then they go back and watch it. You know, we did pass Measure V. Potentially, we can get an influx of income, which is really, really good, but we have like jillions of demands out there that we still have to prioritize. I know you guys are more than overworked, to say the least. So I too, I think it's inappropriate to do it now, but maybe we should revisit that in the future. But I think right now, given the fact that we really don't know what we're gonna do with our funding and going forward and the pressures and all of that, I don't think we should broadcast currently. But maybe bring it back in a year or two. Maybe we revisit it with each budget round and see where we stand and what's happening within the city and the type of input that we get from the public and if we feel that it's necessary. So it appears that the majority says, no, not now.
And can I make one more comment?
Sure.
And maybe if you guys could do like some sort of poll on our social media, if people want to weigh in whether or not they watch our live streams, so that way at least maybe we can get some other numbers of potentially what people are watching on TV, because that's the only way we're going to know whether or not people are. I mean, I get it too. People say they watch it, but these numbers that we get from live streaming obviously isn't giving us an accurate number. But I mean, the only way we would be able to tell is that, I'm assuming, is we do an individual poll. But how we would do that, I have no idea. But just to find out, if this is something that's worth looking at in the future.
Yeah, we can certainly get creative with some polling on the local access channel.
Well,
So I
and
do
we,
have-
excuse me, Karen, we periodically do surveys in our community. And maybe, do you watch the council meetings and would you be interested in watching commission? Maybe that's a couple of questions that could be added to the next survey that we do.
So Mayor, I have a question. This recommendation is actually contradictory to itself. The proposed solution is to restructure the recruitment of the key positions for the full-time cable TV producer and the full-time cable TV associate, which, as I stated earlier, that our staff is saying that they have a need for consistency in that. But then it says, so I think there's two things here. Are we approving the proposed solution in the restructuring and denying the advice against the expansion of the broadcasting, or I don't understand what the council has directed staff to do?
The question that the council asked us to look at, what would it cost to broadcast? So that's why those costs are there. So we've looked at it, we're continuing to look at it, but our current structure doesn't allow us to do the best job we would like. I shouldn't say the best job. We do a fantastic job with what we have, but it's very hard because we are minimally staffed. So the question that the council asked, what would it cost us to do it? So that's why that cost is there. But our recommendation as staff is that this isn't the time. And we agree that we should look at it in the future, but in future budget proposals, we're gonna ask to change the structure of our Channel 3. And then we'll figure out what that looks like for us, and then can we take on additional work? Correct, yeah.
Okay, I understand that now.
Okay, anything further to be discussed? Anything from the audience? Okay. Karen?
Thank you.
Anything else? Linda, anything else? Okay, then with that, we will adjourn to our next regular meeting, which will be held on April 16th at 6, with closed session no earlier than 4 if necessary.